microphone as soon as I'm done with it, and a microphone on this side. If you'd like to ask Mano a question, please line up here. If you'd like to ask Joe a question, please line up here. I have several written questions, but because we have a limited number of mics, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and forth. Make it inconvenient for me instead of anyone else, okay? So we'll begin, actually I am going to start with one question that will kind of let us do the logistics here. And I'm going to ask this one of Joe. Joe, how do you describe this invisible being, God?
Well, that's a tough one. Without being God, to know exactly. Well, I suppose if we're thinking of it, if I understand the question right, is if the focus is on the invisibility of God, that's very much related, I think, if I understand the question, to be God's apparent hiddenness. God seems to be invisible, He's hidden, and so how do we explain God if, say, He's a loving God and He wants to be present in our lives? He seems to be quite invisible, physically speaking, to say the least. And so I might perhaps want to answer that in a few different ways. I might think of maybe His hiddenness probably illustrates a critical difference between His nature and ours. I mean, it's a brute fact. I mean, God, you know, our physical eyes can only see what has boundaries. I can see this table because it has boundaries. Well, the ontological status of God, by that I mean His nature, is by definition boundaryless as far as physical entities. So my eyes, you know, what we see is just a brute fact that we may not be able to see God as He is in His fullness. Also, though, His hiddenness, or His invisibility, in the words of the question, I think allows us also to make free choices. You know, if God was constantly visible to us, if He was constantly, you know, on our shoulder or looking over us, constantly popping up with one miracle right after another, that would be a bit coercive and counterproductive of the reason God created this world to begin with. This world is a world where we have been given a charge to make soul-forming choices, right? Soul-forming choices, just such kind of choices that would develop our character that hopefully are in alignment with the will of God. And so in that sense, if God has as one of the purposes for existence and for our lives is that we develop soul-forming choices, we need free will. But true, significant free will would need a sense of absence of God so that we can allow movement, we can allow some breathing room to make those kinds of choices. And choice is needed for a loving relationship. I didn't marry a wife who's a robot, who's forced to choose to love me. I wanted her to choose to do so. And so there's choices that's involved in that. And so that's one area. If the question, I could read the question a couple different ways. Perhaps the question is asking, describe our invisible God. God is, I think Anselm's definition is sort of a minimal sort of definition of God, is that God is being than that which nothing greater can be conceived. That being the case, God would be obviously not only very different than the universe, but it would be a category mistake to say that God is just one more thing in the index of things in this universe. God is the very basis of our being and is not defined by physiological limits and therefore His invisibility.
1 minute. If you listen to the answer, that answer is very similar to the demons of friction that I spoke about earlier. An invisible, transparent being who does all these things, but we don't know how, we don't know why. Well, actually, people who argue for God that way start out in two ways. One is, yeah, God is a mysterious entity beyond our comprehension, ineffable in some way. While saying that, then you try to explain that by postulating all properties of God. God wants us to do this, He's hiding from us for these reasons, and so on. So on the one hand, you claim ineffability for this mysterious being. On the other hand, you claim that you know what He wants. Stephen Law, the philosopher, calls that effing the ineffable. He says, you start out with the ineffable and then you add properties to it. So again, the question is, if you are allowed to make up any kinds of reasons to explain anything, What do you have? You don't have a theory, you just have an imaginary being. As I said before, the non-existence and the invisible look very much alike. How do you tell the difference?
Done. You can stay there, Mark.
Oh,
First question from the mic.
All right. Dr. Singham, why would we have evolved the ability to comprehend and articulate our utter insignificance in the universe? How is that advantageous for survival? If I concede that there is no God and that we are merely the products of billions of years of random collisions of matter, what is the point of my living at all? And why has evolution even permitted me to ask this devastating question?
evolution, okay, to start, why is evolution created this? It is an evolutionary advantages for us to be able to reason about our surroundings. To ask, if you didn't ask questions about your surroundings, why things are, why is that animal looking at me, why is the lightning striking, if you didn't ask those questions, then you would be just wandering around randomly and you probably wouldn't last very long. So the evolution of intelligence is a natural product of evolution. I mean, the question is, why does it, if there's no God, why is there no meaning? Is that it? What is the question?
The question is, what is the point of my living at all? Why has evolution enabled me to develop a sense of self-awareness that I can ask the point of my existence?
I think life is worth living for its own sake. I didn't exist before I was born. I will not exist after I die. But the fact that I'm here is a wonderful thing. And the life that I have is valuable for its own sake, and I enjoy living. I enjoy living. I enjoy the things that life gives me. And I don't see why that should not be the case. The fact that there is no God seems to be irrelevant to my appreciation of existence.
Well, I think it's a great question. I appreciate your question. And it has to do with the philosophy of mind, I think. You know, why would evolution be a good explanation for the rise of consciousness, for the rise of our rational faculties? In fact, there is an argument against evolutionary naturalism. Alvin Plantinga, if you want to do some research on this. Basically, the sense is that the core of atheistic evolution, of natural selection, is that it is purely fitness-aimed for survival, not truth-aimed. If I understand your question, we shouldn't be able to be rational faculties just by given evolution. This just means that a mindless, unguided evolution had no intelligent or rational goals in mind. It is not a mechanism for evolving beings to find truth, but only for promoting biological survival. One could say that evolution doesn't care about truth, its only care is for survival. Thus, agnostic scientist Dr. David Berlinski outlines the problem, saying, why should a limited and finite organ, such as the human brain, have the power to see into the heart of mathematics or matter? These are subjects that have nothing to do with the Darwinian business of scrabbling up the greasy pole of life. It is as if liver, in addition to producing bile, were to demonstrate an unexpected ability to play the violin. This is a question Darwinian biology has not answered. And so now the particular argument then doesn't necessarily prove atheism to be false. It would just simply suggest that there's no way of cognitively reliably believing both atheism and true, because they would be self-defeating and showing that they have an undercutted defeater. But I would say, since we generally do take it that irrational faculties are reliable, the existence of God makes better sense of rational faculties being reliable than atheism. Sorry.
Now pretty soon we're gonna find out what happens when you run over.
Show it to me. I'm wordy. Okay. Preachers are wordy.
All right. I want to make a quick.
What? The mic on. Oh! The mic was not.
Your voice goes.
I want to make a quick comment on the first premise of your cosmological argument for God, that everything that has a beginning has a cause. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many physicists, especially quantum mechanics, that agree with that premise, but that's not my main point. My main question is, by and large, the most the discussion was on top of morality and how if there is no God, there cannot be an objective morality, and all these terrible things would be true. And my question is, what does that have any bearing on whether or not God actually exists or not? It just seems like an argument that I don't like what this would entail, therefore there is a God. It doesn't seem to give actual evidence for the existence of a God, rather than I don't like the idea of there not being a God.
Great question. Let me deal with that second one first. I think there may be a confusion. My argument didn't deal with, let me use this term here, moral epistemology. It was dealing with moral ontology. The difference is, I'm not suggesting that atheists and believers cannot know what's right. They can know between good and evil. I mean, I suggest that probably our moral views in many respects would be the same. What I'm suggesting isn't what we can know. It's not even moral semantics. I think we can all define words like morality, what's right, what's wrong. And so, can an atheist be good? Of course they can. But what I'm arguing, and I think if I understand the question, what was missed, what I'm arguing is there's no basis for moral grounding. That there's no objective ground for it. There's no ontological definition of what morality is given evolution. Well, if that's the case, and evolution is objective, and it does have an ontologically that is grounded somewhere beyond just mere impulse or our epistolic knowledge, what we know, then the best explanation for that is that there's a moral mind, a moral lawgiver, if you will, that would serve as the grounding. God's nature, then, is the very grounding for our moral standards and our moral codes.
Well, if I could just clarify, I take issue with the claim the idea that you assume that we both agree there is an objective morality. My question, well, let's just put it this way. Let's say that, can you give me any argument that does not have anything to do with you would feel bad or you wouldn't like this toward an objective morality? What evidence do you have for an objective morality existing in the first place?
Yes. My argument doesn't depend on how we feel or even how many people feel the same way I do about ethics. That would be dealing with the universality of ethics and what we feel and everybody feels about ethics. Again, what I'm suggesting is the ontology of morality. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. We could imagine, let's say, the Nazis were in World War II, and they spread all of their moral ideas and so forth, and they made them universal. Well, even though they make them universal, where everybody feels that way, everybody holds that way, my argument doesn't address that, about that. My argument is saying that even though many people feel that way, the universality of morality is there. What I'm suggesting is that irregardless of how universal a system of ethics is in any culture, that there is that they are in fact violating the moral basis of the objective moral standards, say that racism is wrong. So no matter how many people feel that racism is right, say in Nazi Germany or whatever, it doesn't matter how many people feel that way. My argument doesn't depend on feeling. My argument depends on objective basis for moral codes.
Time. No more fault. Sorry.
How do you arrive at that objective basis?
The nature of God.
Morality is an interesting question, but we know where these moral instincts come from. People have done research on it. Computer simulations looked at behavior in animals. We know the basis how kinship morality arises. We know how reciprocal morality arises, and people have studied this in animals and using computer simulations to show them. And then as these primal instincts of looking after one's neighbors and relatives come into being, then when societies became formed, those relationships became more complex, and we developed higher and higher levels of morality. For example, we now know that slavery is wrong. This seemed to be totally oblivious to the people who lived in biblical times. They had slavery. Whereas now we think, how can you justify slavery? We believe that treating women equally is more moral now, and we do treat them more equally. We have advanced by way of society getting together based on our primal moral instincts, building on those to create far more moral societies now than there were in biblical times. That is true. Now we are going further. We are saying it's wrong to treat homosexuals, gay people differently. They are part of the community. They have the same rights as everybody else. This is the expansion of the moral circle. People are saying animals have more rights. We shouldn't be bad to animals. We should treat them well. The circle of whom we encompass in our moral standards are expanding, and we are raising it. That's why I say we are far more moral now than we were in biblical times. Oh.
Because I can jump right in front of the line.
Privileges of being the moderator, you do.
I'm standing in for everybody else. Okay, for Mano. You say there is no God. What are the implications if there is?
If there is? The implications of if there is a God, well, it would depend on what kind of God he is. We don't know. Since there's no God, we don't know. Every indication, if you say there's a God, is that the God is a pretty bad character. Kills people with earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes, doesn't care if children die. All kinds of terrible natural disasters occur. And if there's a God, I'd have to say, if I meet this God, I'd say, what's going on here? Why are you killing so many people? That would be my view.
Go, Joe.
I think there's a lot of implications if there's no God. I mean, if there's no God, number one, there would be no basis of morality, and the whole idea that animals have rights, certainly, but my question isn't do they have rights, my question is on what basis ought they have rights? I mean, what is the moral grounding again? It's not a matter of, I mean, we can agree that animals can have rights, so forth, but of course humans, I would say, are made in the image of God, and therefore we are special beings, and we do have a unique moral sense about us. But I think that would be lost if God doesn't exist. I think a whole lot more would be lost. I think the whole sense of goodness. In fact, there's an argument, against. Well, I know he's gonna get up on me here, so I better settle down. But there's all sorts of implications if God does not exist. I'll stop there before I get jumped.
He's trainable. Next question.
Hi, Joe. My name is Randy.
Hello.
I don't know much about you, and you don't know much about me, but I'm going to ask a couple of questions, if I may.
One
I saw a ring on your left finger here. You're married.
Yes, sir.
You have children.
Yes, sir.
You love them.
Oh, absolutely.
I know you're not all powerful, but if your children were suffering, would you want to do whatever you could to help them?
Absolutely.
Okay, I thought
I would do.
like you, I have been a pastor. I'm one of the atheists here. But I spent more than 25 years of my life as a pastor in Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin. I assume you believe that God is loving and powerful.
Yes.
And so I would just appreciate your comments on, I remember a woman in my congregation in Westerville decades ago, 34-year-old mother, wonderful Christian woman, did lots of service for lots of people and died at 34 of breast cancer.
Sorry.
And I think of those 300 high school girls kidnapped over in Africa recently. And I just would be interested in your comments about if God is loving and powerful, and those are his children, why doesn't God help them?
Yes. Very good. I appreciate that question very much. The question, why doesn't God help them? I wouldn't necessarily suggest he doesn't, but that's going to be another thing for another time. The question of why evil exists in our world, and certainly I think that's a good argument. I think that's a good, has a lot of force to it. I appreciate the question. But the first thing I want to ask, I would wonder that I'm just thinking, would I be expected to understand? I mean, I barely understand my own mind and doings. Would I really expect to understand everything that God is doing or understand what he's doing in the world if God is an all-powerful, all-knowing being? I'm not sure I would. I mean, well, being God is that'd be a pretty challenging job. I'm not signing up for that. See, God is omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing, and so just me not knowing a reason doesn't mean there is not a reason. And so I think that might commit a fallacy. Like Job didn't have a reason, but nonetheless God loved him and had good purposes for him. Also, again, God has put us on earth for soul-forming purposes. The existence of evil, hiddenness, whatever, allowing these things, and if God is all loving and all good, how can he do that? Well, he would if he's all loving and wants a loving relationship with us, which implies free will, as you probably know, but free will allows us to be able to engage in a personal loving relationship with God. So it makes sense, it's consistent for a loving God to create beings with free will who can engage in love with him. But to have free will implies the possibility of hatred, implies a possibility of anger, it implies a possibility of a world gone wrong based on their own volition. But God wants us to make moral, soul-forming choices that would be in alignment with him, what he would want for us. He loves us because he wants that. But it's consistent with an all-powerful God, too, because I would say that even an all-powerful God cannot create a world where both libertarian freedom, significant freedom exists, but at the same time coerces every person to do the right thing all of the time and keep everybody from hurting themselves. Those would be mutually exclusive. If he truly wants libertarian free will for love and relationship's sake, then an all-powerful being, in my view, would, because it would be a logical inconsistency to say, I'm going to create free will beings, but not let them use their free will that I've given to them. I hope that answered the question. Thank you for the question, Mom.
This is a serious issue. The existence of suffering is a real serious problem for religious believers. And most of them, I mean, you just saw what Joe did. First, he started by saying that, who knows the mind of God? God is this all-powerful being. Who am I to know the mind of God? Then immediately he went on to say, God wants this. He wants to have a soul-affirming relationship with us. He wants us to do this. He wants us to have free will, and he wants us to make choices. He did what Stephen Law said. You started effing the ineffable. You started making it concrete when you just before said that it wasn't. So the question is, why is our moral standards have changed thanks to human beings? For example, if you look at the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible, it's an awful story. Okay? If today somebody said, God told me to sacrifice my child, I'm going to do that, what would we do? Would we say, wow, this man's faith is tremendous, we really respect it? No, we would call child protection services and the police and make sure that that didn't happen. Our morality has changed. And it has improved. Things that were in the Bible, the story of Noah, where the entire planet was killed, except a fish and 6 people. It's a terrible, 8 people, it's a terrible story. Who would think that that is a moral thing to do now? Nobody. That's because our standards of morality have increased.
Time.
The first person to ask the question kind of hit a lot on this, but I'm not trying to refute what Dr. Singham said. I just have I'm having a hard time understanding it. You used to background in special education major. I work a lot with children getting to understand what's right and wrong, the conditioning, positive and negative reinforcement, stuff like that. From my experience, granted it's a different group than an average group of students, they need instruction from someone who knows more than they do on how to act properly. Someone who has those standards put in place. And based off what you said earlier, from what I can comprehend of it, it's kind of like we all came to that together. But from what I've seen, it's like we need someone to kind of set the building blocks for that and say, this is what this is what that is, and give us negative and positive consequences to reinforce those so that we as people would overcome that. So I guess the basis of my question is directed to you, Dr. Singham, is how is it that we didn't need someone to instruct us on morality and we just kind of came up with it on our own?
It's a good question. The answer, as I said, is that we have some what I would call primal moral impulses, like for example, genetic. There's an advantage for evolutionary biology for the genes for us to take care of our own children. Okay, that's concrete. We have reciprocal altruism, where it's advantageous for small communities to help each other so that they get help in return. Those are the primal things that evolution explains. Then we form complex societies. Then we have the question of how do we live together in a complex society without destroying ourselves. So then that required us to learn how to treat each others who are not our immediate kin or who are not within a close circle but larger, better. So then we develop rules of behavior. That's what we call morality, how people should treat other people. And as our worlds have become larger, we have gone from villages to nations to the world, we have started expanding that morality, applying it to more people. And that, as we encounter more and different kinds of people, people of different races, people of different sexualities, we have started to redefine our morality to include them in our sphere of. And then we start thinking, well, why do we limit it only to humans? Why not to animals too? So these are the things that emerge from somewhat biological beginnings, but as the complexity of society and the scope of society increase, these moral standards also emerge naturally. One doesn't need, we teach our children because that's the easiest way to do it, and we want to do that because they're young children, they can't learn the evolutionary history of 10,000 years of society on their own. Just like there's a Newton who discovered the laws of physics, Newton's laws, but now we teach children that. We don't put them in a room with blocks and say, go and discover the Newton's laws of motion. It doesn't work. That's not an efficient way of doing things. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I would say that evolution does not provide the moral grounding for ethics that's sufficient to answer that question that you had. We definitely need an outside source beyond mere human genetic impulses. Human genetic impulses, I would say, again, and as Professor Singham suggests, we just do what's dictated by our brains. Well, if that's the case, then you don't get an ought from an is. Just the fact that our natures are the way they are, genetically, biologically, evolutionally speaking, it just happened historically that we've evolved the way that we have. That just is the case. You can't get an ought from an is. You can't get a moral basis for that. It's not that you can't, in his view, create morality, but it would be so relative. We would engage in speciesism somehow that, you know, and our evolution, if we could rewind the time again, the clock, we could have had any different set of moral ethics if that's all it is, if it's just a mere expression of our genetics or culture. But absolutely, the best and the only grounding for moral ethics that's sufficient enough that explains why we are the way we are and who we are is certainly God. It is the nature of God that serves as the basis and grounding of ethics.
Yes. Can you hear this?
Yes.
Much of what I have heard today is an implication that theists somehow are more moral than humanists. I affirm that humanists are just as moral and capable of compassion as the theists are. So I want you to consider Mark Twain's explanation of the moral sense in his Letters from the Earth, in which he says that the moral sense allows humanity to be cruel in the name of religion. Do we need religion to be moral or develop morality? And I would say, of course not. Even in Camus' novel, The Plague, the existential is a moral being and knows the plague is not a visitation, a punishment from God. People must act morally, this is Camus' argument, despite the fact that there is no God. And finally, science's strength is that it is always seeking and always self-correcting, and we seem to take this as a weakness.
Appreciate that question. Very good question. Again, I would suggest that there's a distinction here. My argument that I presented isn't about moral epistemology, what we can know. I agree with you that you can know what's morally right as well as I could and anybody else. I'm not suggesting, I never suggested atheists can't be good. They can be great, honest, you know, and have the same basic moral codes and believe those things as I do. What I'm suggesting isn't what we believe epistemically. What I'm saying is, do we have a basis or a grounding or a sufficient reason for doing so? And I'm saying that atheism is inept as a philosophy, as a worldview, and it cannot give us any solid ground by which to build the moral ethics that we all believe. What I'm saying is God, as that moral perfect being, would be the basis that would serve as the objective moral truths that we experience. Does that answer the question?
Once again, I don't understand this objective moral truth that Joe is speaking about. Because I've shown that if you go back in time, people believed all kinds of awful things as perfectly moral. And we have changed over time. So what is this absolute moral, objective moral truth? I don't see it. All I see, all evidence points to morality as something that evolves. It's localized. Different communities have different moral standards, and we come together as the communities get larger, they become one. What was this moral standard? When did it exist? The fact that it's grounded, I don't know what that means. We have a moral standard. What was the objective moral standard? And if so, how has it changed? How could it have changed from religion to religion, from time to time?
When I saw the video that Mano had in the second section, and then follow-up discussion by Joe, which was, I think, kind of at the beginning of the design argument that's very popular among believers. I was struck when Joe was discussing the design argument and the beginning concept with what I believe might have been an equivocation in the word beginning. Okay, I think that oftentimes philosophical misunderstandings or understandings can be anchored and based upon equivocations of language, using one word in different ways. That generated in me two questions, and I'll give the questions and if you'd comment, please. One question, the first one, I said, if something always existed, thinking of the universe or matter or energy, then asking the question about beginnings makes really no sense to me. Question one. Question two, was our universe created from nothing, so as some would assert? Or was it created, i.e. started in its current form, from everything? Let me read the second question again. Was our universe created from nothing, as some might assert? Or was it created from everything? Your comments.
Mine, addressed to me, right?
Yeah.
How the universe came about is an interesting question. For a long time, and it has changed with time, and it's still being discussed. There are various models now. One is that the Big Bang was a unique event that occurred at some. What the Big Bang says is not that it was created at a point in time, because creation implies some sort of temporal process. What it says is that when we look back and run the clock backwards, it seems to converge at some point that we call time equals 0. That's what it is. But that's just one model. We also have a different model of eternal inflation, which says that things have existed eternally. Universes are being created all the time. They expand by a process called inflation. And in that creation of the embryonic universe, we have the matter, the embryonic matter, the electrons and quarks and gluons, and the forces that combine them, created. And as the universe expands, these evolve in a particular way. And of these 10 to the, now they estimate that we have to 10 to the 500, an enormous number of universes that are possible. There happen to be one that we are in. Now, that is not a surprising thing. If you look, even the one universe that we have is a very inhospitable place. The only place we know life exists is on this tiny planet, in this vast universe. And even on this planet, if you go a few miles up, you die. If you go a few miles down, you die. If you go to the North Pole, you die. If you go to the South Pole, you die. The oceans, you die. We can live in only a tiny fraction of the Earth. So the universe, the idea that the universe was somehow designed for us, doesn't make much sense. If so, it's a very wasteful God. Because it would be like someone living in a vast desert in which there is a tiny oasis and looking around and say, boy, this desert is really a great place to live. No, you just happen to be in this tiny oasis and you were lucky to be there. But that doesn't mean that the universe had to be created or it's a hospitable place. So the idea that the universe was designed by a God implies, if that unlikely event is true, a very wasteful God.
Done.
A bunch of things I have to say, but I'm just going to have time to deal with one. You mentioned quantum fluctuation, sort of being the cause of giving rise to the universe from nothing. Scientist, mathematician, and agnostic Dr. Emile Excel states, "We simply do not know what goes on in the world of the very small. We still do not understand at all what truly happens in the world of the very small. All we have may be shadows of the wall cast by a mysterious veiled reality. So to claim that quantum mechanics somehow tells us that a universe must come from out of nothing without need of some kind of creation, as Krauss does, seems wholly unjustified." There is no scientific evidence for a pre-Planck time quantum inflation. And talking about the Big Bang, quantum time being 10 to the 43rd power of a second, as the Big Bang model suggests. So, time.
He's getting better. And no, I won't try it on Sunday.
Starting a trend.
I actually have two. I'll try to combine them. They're both on morality. The first one is, you give an example of, well, we don't eat our children for fun, and that must come from God. Well, there are countless of species who do not eat their infants. Do they also have morality, and then the bees aren't special, so they do eat their young? That's a kind of bizarre argument to me. Or do they have a survival instinct, but we're special and we have morality instead? The second question, what about brain injury and stroke? And probably everybody's met someone who was very empathetic, very caring. Something happens in their brain and it's gone. And you can tell them they shouldn't make nasty comments, but they can't help it. So is that, where did their morality go if it's innate from God?
Good question.
And that would be great.
To deal with the second question real quick, great question, is morality has a principle that says that ought implies is. Okay, somebody is only morally responsible when they're culpable of such that they have their mental rational faculties in place. God does not hold somebody accountable to what they're mentally incapable of doing. So absolutely, I'm not suggesting that I'm not somehow saying we're disembodied beings and our bodies don't influence our beliefs, our motives, and things like that. Certainly that all comes into play. But related to, what was the first question? I'm sorry, you can repeat that.
Animal species who don't eat their kids.
Oh, yes. Well, there are many animal species that do, I'll just say that. In fact, to give an illustration of that, I was in an ethics class one time with an agnostic teacher. It was a fun class. But she brought in an example of what's natural, and I just raised the question, well, if everything in nature is something we can do, and when that's analogous to us, then I hope my wife doesn't get word of that, because the praying mantis eats the head of her male after she's done with him, and I really hope my wife doesn't get word of that, because there are differences between animals and human beings. Part of that is human beings are made in the image of God, and animals don't do things out of moral reasons, not in a sense of ought. They do it out of instinct. The booby birds, to take an example. Booby birds, actually, when she has their young, she'll have typically like 2 siblings. And what they'll do is they'll fight with each other and exercise siblicide. The stronger one's going to kill the other one. And so the stronger one remains and is able to eat the food, and that's a survival instinct for the booby bird. Now imagine a world where if evolution is true, if Darwinian evolution is true, and it's unguided, then we could have just as easily evolved that sort of moral standard. And so we would be like exercising civilicide. I know I have 2 daughters, sometimes they like to kill each other, but I really don't think that that's a parallel to that. So there's, I think, very keen differences between animals and human beings. That doesn't mean animals don't have rights, and they don't have a sense of consciousness, and they don't need to be valued. Absolutely they do. I don't want to minimize that. But human beings are beings that are made in the image of God, and I think the analogy is that fails in that regard. If that helps.
I'm not sure what being in the image of God means, since we don't know, or we say we don't know what God wants. But animals, I agree with Joe that animals have an instinctual morality in some species. They've studied this with bats, for example, who donate blood to each other, vampire bats who donate blood to each other. If one bat doesn't get blood, another bat will give it to it, and that will be returned to the future. And all kinds of animal behavior that's cooperative and so on. What has happened with human beings is not a quantitative difference, but we have developed language, which is a biological feature that are process. We could start communicating with each other, and as a result, we formed complex societies. So the primal moral impulses that are there in all animal species, or most animal species, were not sufficient to govern these complex societies that we created by virtue of the ability to have language and communicate. So we have developed different levels of moral behavior to accommodate the fact that we can't have siblings killing each other. We shouldn't have parents murdering their children, though even those, as I pointed out, have taken us a long time to come to that way. We now have moral standards that say it's wrong to oppress other people, because that's something that affects all of us as a community and makes us less people. So these are evolutionary, socially evolved moral constructs.
Question?
How does an explosion like a Big Bang create such a perfect world and human life?
That's a good question. You mean like what you saw in the video, right? It was complicated. And we have to take into account all the laws of how the initial Big Bang produced quarks and gluons and electrons. And those, under the laws of physics that we now understand, have come together to form the universe that we have. Okay? Now, the fact, and those are well understood, starting with what we knew at the first few seconds of the universe, everything else is not made up, it's a prediction of the theories. So now, the fact that humans came into being and the earth came into being is a low probability event. And that's why people find it hard to imagine that it could have occurred by natural forces. But low probability events happen all the time. For example, the chances of my being struck by lightning are very small. But somebody is being struck by lightning all the time. So these low probability events happen. And the fact that life on the earth we find life only on the earth and not anywhere else as far as we know, though I think there's a chance because the universe is so vast that there's life elsewhere, shows that it's a low probability event. So yes, we find it hard to understand when low probability events occur. We think there must be a reason for it. Supposing you're thinking of your friend at some moment, a friend you haven't spoken for a long time, and that person suddenly calls you and you think, wow, I was just thinking of this person and the person has called. And you think, there must be some reason, maybe I had a premonition. The fact is that low probability events happen all the time because our lives are full of complicated things. What would be amazing is if nothing like that ever happened in your life. All of us experience that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a low probability event. It's hard to understand for a person just looking at it. But scientists have looked into this and figured out how all these things came about. Okay? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, great question. I reminded of Robert Hoyle, who used the analogy that to say that life just evolved by chance there is a much greater chance of a hurricane being swept through a junkyard to produce a Boeing 747 jet airplane than there is a single-cell organism to be produced by blind chance. There's a principle called the law of cause and effect, and that basically says every effect has to have an adequate antecedent cause. And even granting the Big Bang, just no explosion, just random explosion, that's just going to cause more chaos, as I would understand it. The whole idea, though, is that there has to be an adequate cause to the intricate design that we see in this wonderful, beautiful universe. It's not just going to be, a chance explosion. It's going to be something that is absolutely designed, and I believe the mind of God is the adequate answer, the adequate cause for the wonderful effects we see in our universe. Finish those off. Okay.
Reverend Joe,
Good evening.
the question has been raised as to whether the biblical God is a possible God from the point of view of being regularly described by pairs of traits that are logically not containable in a single being. For instance, being all good and all powerful. Since the prologue to the Gospel of John insists that God made everything, not just the good things, but all the bad things that would be sin and misery included. So that would question whether he's all good or good. No. On the other hand, if he abhors those problems, but since they exist, then he must be not powerful enough to change. The other two pair that I'll bring up is all just and all merciful, but justice and mercy are conflicting issues, and being all just and all merciful is conceivably impossible for a single being to be both.
Good question. I don't think mercy and justice are incompatible at all. We exercise it in our society all the time. We want to, and we want to be merciful always. We want to exercise mercy. But when somebody violates somebody else's rights or moral standing or their respect of human nature, when somebody, a criminal or whatever, does something, we put them in a jail, we put them in prison. Not because we don't want to be and desire to be merciful to them. We always want to. But because of their free will choices, because of what they've done, they have to. And it was their choices that brought about the justice. Not God's ideal will. God's ideal will would be never and nobody to be lost. Nobody would experience justice. But again, the free will argument, I think, has a great plausible answer to that. Now, with regard to the first one, which my memory...
Yes, it's all good and all powerful.
That somehow are they mutually exclusive?
Well, yes. In other words, either God, since misery and evil exist, then either God tolerates it because he's not all good, or he doesn't like it, but he's not powerful enough to change it.
Well, we have two daughters, and we did that. We made our daughters because of love and our intention for love. And of course we did that, and this may be not a complete analogy, but out of love, we wanted a family and a relationship. But we also know that there's a risk, right? There's a risk that these beings, our daughters, are going to grow up, and could they make bad choices? Could they make could they do evil? Could they put evil in this world? Could evil be put on them? We know all of that, and yet we still bring children into this world. Loving beings, love requires or desires relationship. But a true, genuine relationship requires choices to be made and put into that relationship. But to have choices, genuine choices, you have to be able to have two alternates. I mean, you have to, on one hand, be capable of doing the good, But on the other hand, if it's genuinely free choices, you also are capable of doing the evil. God doesn't create evil. He has created human beings with free will because he loves and wants to be loved in return. That's the desire, his ideal will. There's nothing evil about that any more than there's something evil about us having children that could do evil in their future. But it's we, human beings, who have introduced evil into this world, and that's, I think, the way I would want to address that question.
But that would not, okay, in response, that would not address why infants die. Newborn infants suffer from some horrible diseases and they die. How can they, I mean, they have not exercised free will. They've just been born. And so how does that explain it? I think the problem of suffering, and not only individual babies, we find thousands and millions killed in catastrophic disasters. How can that be? Free will doesn't answer that question. And doing the wrong thing doesn't answer that question. In fact, all that we know about God is that the ideas of God have changed, as I said, from different societies, from different cultures, and at different times. For example, Robert Sapolsky studied the various theories of God, and he found that historically rainforest dwellers live in a harsh climate with nature's abundance all around tend to be polytheists, believing in spirits based on nature, and less likely to assume that gods intervene in their lives. Desert dwellers living in a monotonous, harsh and unforgiving environment were more likely to believe in a single, sometimes harsh, misogynistic, interventionist God. For various reasons, it was the God of the desert dwellers that was passed on to much of humanity. Kind of sad, but if we had the rainforest dwellers, we would have had a much kinder God, if a God exists, which it doesn't.
Dr. Singham, thank you for coming and speaking tonight. I appreciate it. My question is, if the type of events that were described in the New Testament, such as healings and prophecy, hearing things from God you couldn't naturally know, deliverance from evil spirits, if those events were happening today, would you believe? Why or why not? And also think, you know, you could dismiss the premise as highly improbable, but we're just talking about the universe being formed as itself a highly improbable event. So we have established that those improbable events do happen. So if those type of things that were described are happening now, would that impact your worldview?
Sure. I mean, I can think, as I said in my answer sheet, I can think a lot of things that would impact my worldview. Have you noticed, though, when you talk of healing, that the healings take place in cases where there is a good chance of spontaneous healing? For example, now here's one I would, if people got together and prayed for an amputee, somebody who's lost the limb due to surgery, and prayed for that limb to grow back, and it grew back, I'd believe in a flash. Have you noticed that people never pray for that? If you go to these faith healing services, they never pray for things like that. Okay? So that's the question, you see. We now, when we think of miracles, what are we talking about? We talk of the faces of Jesus appearing on a piece of toast. That's what our miracles have come down to these days. And that's because most of the things that we thought in the past were miracles, now we can explain them. So we are now, people who want to believe in miracles, grasp for pieces of toast or a stain on a wall or something, you know. Recently I saw a pancake which had the picture of Jesus on it. There are all kinds of reasons for this to happen. But that's what's happening now. Miracles just don't happen.
I think, the question of miracles, first of all, has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis and using the law of rationality and the validity of historical documentation and eyewitness testimony. Take, for instance, the miracles of the New Testament. We don't have time to get into this. That'd be a whole other debate, really. We would have to look at it from a historical perspective, not a scientific perspective. We can't scientifically, empirically go back in time and look at, put it, the water that was turned wine in a test tube as it happened, nothing like that. Miracles, by definition, happen in history. And the historical events may or may not be repeated. But let me just add one other thing. I don't believe that God performed miracles. By miracles, I mean those limited, those kinds of ideas like raising the dead and healing people and doing all of those things. God didn't do those things to try to produce belief in his existence. Even in the Bible, there's never, God doesn't do miracles to try to get people to believe he exists. Those miracles were done anytime he sought to introduce a new prophet or introduce some new truth into the world, introduce Jesus Christ, a new figure into this world, and therefore they needed and used and was able to do those supernatural healings to confirm that they were from God. But that's another whole other subject.